I'm interested in, you talk about the pandemic, and that was a period where we saw a lot of women leave the workforce and such. I mean, what do you think, it was a stop, in terms of a physical change of scenery and how we worked. Was there something more that you think really sort of acted as a catalyst in people you talked to?
100%. I have a chapter in the book called The Necessity Entrepreneur. These are people, these are people who are squeezed out of mainstream jobs for whatever reason. So we're talking about women, people of color, the LGBTQ community, and increasingly now, baby boomers. Baby boomers are up there toward retirement age or beyond. And so all of these groups are finding themselves marginalized in various ways, and very often have no choice but to strike out on their own. But they're doing so in some remarkable ways. I'm particularly struck by the career paths of women. There's actually a professor at Bowling Green State University named Deborah O'Neill, who follows women's, she has studied women's career paths, which are different than men's. So men tend to have a straight up career path and then sort of plateau at the end. Women have this very different career path where it starts out great guns along with the men, and then in the middle kind of is a mess. Whether or not they have children or even are married, women experience this same, they're hitting the glass ceiling, they're not getting the same level of promotions, opportunities, mentoring, none of this stuff.
Right.
And it's really difficult for women. This third stage, what she calls, which comes after basically a stop, right? The women, something happens. They either get fired or they're just stalled out, they're pushed out, or maybe a kid goes to college and they're like, I need another chapter. That leads to the final step, which is what this professor calls reinvention. Almost every woman ends up reinventing her career somewhere along the line. And very often the reinvention, this is what's so fascinating, tends to be mission oriented and tends to end up being more fulfilling than the original career, right? So you see, we see it with high profile women, everybody from like Mika Brzezinski, who created Know Your Value, to Ariana Huffington, who created Thrive for women, Sally Krawcheck, who came out of finance and now has Elevest to help women to invest, and Elevate to help elevate women's financial interests.
They can give voice, right? I think they can give voice to what happened to them in that other setting. That's the three examples that you just gave are I think, very poignant and telling examples of people who felt diminished or the life they were leading led to this realization. It's interesting, to kind of sum up the book. You talk to people who had a reinvention early in their life, relatively early, but is there a demographic? Does this resonate more with certain demographics? You mentioned the boomers, for example. What have you found so far? I know it's early days yet, it's just coming up, but even in terms of your own reporting.
Oh, definitely. So I interviewed people from their 20s through their 90s, so wide swath. And what I found is this reinvention cycle that I've laid out for you, it's happening faster and faster the younger you go. So if you look at, for example, like millennials, their average time in a job is only 2 years and 9 months. And if you look at Gen Z, which is now coming into the workforce, their average time in a job is barely 2 years and 3 months. So the cycle is getting shorter, but the work life is getting longer. We are now entering a period where the expected work life, which used to be 40 years, right, from college to age 65, it's now more like 60 years, the span of our working life. But what that means is there's going to be more faster turnaround and more room for any one of us to have multiple careers, which in the end of the day is probably actually sort of a more exciting way to think about than to be, next 60 years I'm going to do the same thing. There's sort of an excitement factor. But the key, and the reason I wrote the book Next, is because we sort of need to understand how that progression works and what are the best practices and what do we need to do to get where we're going.
So, of course, the first piece of advice is people should buy the book, but is there any tactics? I always think, that first step is hardest. Well, any advice you would give to people who are watching this and they're like, yes, I'll do it tomorrow or whatever. What would you sort of suggest being perhaps an exercise or something that you would do yourself in this situation, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I would definitely talk to an expert companion, like tell me what my strengths are. I would definitely look at what already are my hobbies, interests, side interests, to see if I've been sort of stealthily, without consciously realizing it, sort of moving toward another direction. But there's another really, really, really important thing. There's actually two myths that my book Next really explodes that I found to be very encouraging, because these were myths that I was held hostage to as well. And one of them is the idea that we need to know where we are going, and then we have to work backwards. And that is so damaging, right? It's this idea.
Start with the outcome.
Think and Grow Rich, all of those kind of books, right? They tell you, have your goal, make a plan, take step by step to get there, which, by the way, is great if you want to be a surgeon or an investment banker. You know exactly where you're going, right, and you have to plot your way to get there. For most of the people I talked to, that was not the case. So understanding that where you're going may be unexpected, and you need to be open to that. And then, there's this other related myth, this idea of sort of overnight success, overnight transformation. And if you think about it, it starts with Cinderella.
Yeah.
And then it goes up to, like, we're adolescents and it's Superman and Spider-Man and Batman. And then we grow up and it's American Idol, or it's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. We are, and then in the business press, it's like Mark Zuckerberg, he goes from college kid to tech billionaire. Like, we skip over the middle parts of the reinvention stages that I talk about. And that's why I say that struggle piece in the middle, we don't include it in those stories. But actually, the struggle, everybody goes through it. And not only that, it's really important. And not only that, and I think this is the most important thing, even if you kind of feel crappy, because it feels crappy when you're in a struggle, you feel like you're stuck in the mud or spinning your wheels, choose your analogy, you feel like you're not moving. But in fact, you actually are moving forward in that period, and really important work is getting done in that period. That made me feel so much better once I understood that, because I think we've all had those periods in our own lives where we're like, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what I'm going to do next. But in fact, we're doing really important work while that's happening, and we are moving forward.
That's great. Well, that's good. So the book is Next, talking to Joanne Lipman, and good luck. Thanks for joining us.